everyone. My name is Gregory Q. Jenkins. I'm the founder and CEO of Quintasia Studios. This is the Quintasia Podcast. Welcome back. Glad you're here today. Today, we are talking with the board president of the New York Women in Film and Television, Jamie Zelermyer. We're going to have a great conversation today, so let's dive right in. Jamie, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's really great to see you. And so we wanted to talk to you today and, find out a little bit more about NYWIFT. And can you tell our audience members a little bit more about the history of Women in Film and Television and the organization's mission?
NYWIFT, otherwise known as New York Women in Film and Television, has been in existence for over 40 years. We are a membership organization. We have usually in the range of about 2,500 members, both men and women, who are looking for support within the film and television community, which can also include now things like podcasting and some theater, and sort of the umbrella of the entertainment industry. And it was started by, three women who just really felt like the organization was needed, that women needed a place to create a sense of community, to give people shoulders to stand on. We know this is not an easy business to get into. So the mission of NYWIFT is to really help women progress and to support women as they move through the various levels of the industry, and to really support women, and some men. I never want to exclude the men. We've had male board members. We do have male. I mean, obviously it's predominantly women, but the organization can support. It does not exclude anyone. It's we do believe in inclusivity, and it takes a village to really survive in this industry.
Yes.
So, but it's really about giving support and helping women thrive and creating a sense of community. And I can talk more about some of our specific programs later or now, but to kind of show examples of how we do that.
Well, let's dive a little deeper. As you said, like building a community is, this to me, this is all about building a community. And I think if you're starting out in this business, really, no matter what side you are, it's building that community that's going to help you propel you forward. So can you talk a little bit about how NYWIFT goes about and helps people do that?
Well, I'll even just start with my own story of how I got involved with NYWIFT, which was earlier on in my career. We have an event each year called the Muse Awards, which is an event where we honor women both behind the camera and in front of the camera. So we usually honor 2 actresses, an executive of some sort who's, doing really fantastic work, a change maker, and now a director. We have a specific grant that honors a director. And the Muse Awards is a huge undertaking. And pre-COVID, obviously, we would do this event in person at the Hilton with, 1,000 people. And that takes a lot of volunteers. And so I used to volunteer at the Muse Awards, which is a way to meet people. It's a way to go to the event for free as a volunteer, but it's a way to sort of enter into a community that might feel like there's a wall up and it's hard to know how to get in. And so that's just like a very, um, it's just a nice example of how women can get involved, sort of break into the industry in a different kind of side way and meet people who are trying to do the same thing that they're doing. And we have women who are very established in the business too, who volunteer at some of our events, who have done it for 25 years. And so it's just a nice way to kind of cross pollinate between younger and older and less experienced and more experienced. We do financing workshops and panels. We created during the pandemic, we increased our programming actually by 70%. We've had over 11,000 people, both members and not non-members, at our sort of a lot of our at our virtual events. But we do all we started something called NYWIFT Talks this year, or last year, I guess it was. Now we're in like year 2 of the pandemic. Hard to keep track. But we NYWIFT Talks deals is a 1-hour program virtually. It's at this point that deals with issues related to current cultural events, which would include things like how people are managing in the business during COVID, Black Lives Matter, the stuff going on around, Asian hate and hate crimes. That could be, the Me Too movement, or just a film even that went through the festival circuit during COVID and sort of what that meant and how they did that. So those, so programming wise, those are kind of the types of programs that we're doing to kind of support our members and bring our members in. We also have a signature program, which is called the Writers Lab, which is a writers lab for women over 40, which I'm very deeply embedded in and involved in. And we support usually 12 writers. This year they added TV shows, like pilots into the mix. So I think this year it'll be 16 projects that then go through an intensive 4-day lab with mentors, like just fantastic mentors. And we have that in the US and also now we just started it in the UK. And we also do fiscal sponsorship. So if you're making a project and you need a company that can kind of help you manage and run through the money, which is very common in production, you can do that through NYWIFT. So that's just another way of, and then we have the summit, which we'll talk about also at some point. But NYWIFT really, our goal is to serve our members and to listen to what the membership is needing in the moment and try to help them succeed. And part of that is through community and meeting people, which sometimes leads to jobs, or leads to ideas for younger members about, graduate school or different types of opportunities. We have a job board also. So a lot of stuff. That's not even everything. That's everything I can remember off the top of my head right now. But
well, I think it gives us a good flavor of what NYWIFT does and what kind of support that it gives to its members. I want to go back just for a second. Now, you mentioned that there's this 4-day intensive lab for women writers over 40. Um, do you was there a thinking in terms of the need? I've often heard other writers talk about, is there a bias, an age bias? Generally, when that discussion is had, it's usually referring to male writers. But do you find that there is an age bias with female writers as well?
oh, definitely. And over 40 often means also over 50 or over 60. And we always say at the lab, like, us women over 40 have so much life experience. Like many of us have raised children, been in many relationships, been married, divorced, separated, traveled, had many careers. So who better to tell stories? But there's, I mean, it's no secret that there's sexism in the industry. And on top of that, there is definitely ageism. And I think the ageism hits women differently than men, and women differently than men. And it was three women who started the Writers Lab and partnered, partnered with NYWIFT. But they really run the lab, and we are there to support them and kind of help be partners with them. And they were women over 40 who felt like there was a problem and they wanted to do something about it. And it's grown. The US one is in its maybe sixth year this year, maybe six. I think this is the sixth year. It's financed partially by Meryl Streep and sometimes Nicole Kidman, sometimes Oprah. And there might be, and then the UK one is financed differently because UK has different ways of financing things. And Cate Blanchett is very involved in the UK one. And some of the projects are starting to get some traction. It takes time, but some of the projects are starting to get some traction. And they meet. It's another way to develop community because they meet each other and then they start these Facebook groups and they help each other they guide each other in what kinds of competitions to submit to, and they really support each other. So they get what they get at the lab from their mentors, but then they also get what they get when they form their own community of 12, or this year it'll be 16. So it's a fabulous program, and NYWIFT is just really happy to work with them, and it's growing. And but it really came from three women feeling like there was a need. They felt the problem, like they felt it personally, and they were like, "We're gonna take some action." And we get a good 1,000 submissions. That's a generalization, but in the range, depending on the year, it depends. The first year we did it, I think there were 3,400 submissions.
Wow.
So obviously a lot of women were kind of holding on to things and not sure what to do with them and submitting multiple scripts. And so it's kind of balanced out now, as the years have gone on, but it's a really, I think, important program, and I hope it keeps going.
Yeah, it sounds great. Let me take just a little quick pause here, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who may have joined the podcast but didn't join at the top of the podcast, this is the Quintasia podcast, and we're talking with Jamie Zelermyer from New York Women in Film and Television today. So let me ask you this, Jamie. In your view, do you think things have gotten better for women in the television and film industry over the last 10 years? And I will also add to that, what further advances would you like to see?
I do think things have gotten better. I think that there's always it's incremental, probably. I mean, I'm not a statistician, so I don't want to start, spouting off. I don't know how from year to year, but I know that more women are getting to direct. I think the surge in television has also helped because it's created more opportunity. There just are more opportunities for directors, I think, in general with TV, because most TV shows don't have the same director doing all the episodes. I think it really comes from the top. I think that if you have a showrunner or you have a director that, or a producer that is on board and they say, I want this, or I want it to be this, then that makes a big difference. If you don't consciously do that, then it doesn't, then you get what you get. Which is the normal, and those are all very talented people. So it's not, I think it's just, it's not like, well, I guess I would say like people have to be trained. Like, the film and television industry, it is a skilled industry. So I think also, I guess I'd say there's two sides. One side is it comes from the top, like the top has to say like, we want, half the women to be half the directors to be women, or something like that, or a female DP, or and you're seeing now more steady cam operators, but there's still like in the crafts, areas like grip and electric. I mean, it's still going to be hard to find like a female key grip or a female gaffer, but they're there. And just, there's more female sound mixers, I think, coming up. But the other part is the training and, bringing diverse, a level of diversity to, your PAs and the people that you sort of bring in at the bottom. Because I started as an intern, and worked my way up from a PA to a coordinator to a UPM. So it's just, if people could get their foot in the door and they're competent and they show up on time, that's half the battle. So I think, it's there's many sides to it, how to continue to fix it. But I think it's getting better, I mean, I definitely think it's getting better.
Well,
but
I mean,
not so good that we have to stop, being conscious of it. And it's not as good as it should be. But I think, we want it to be better. And we also know that there are a lot of talented men out there and people of all, so it's like finding that balance. Like, how do you make sure that it's balanced, but that people who have been excluded the doors are open, because the hardest part is like getting that first job.
yes. And I think what's going to happen, and that's certainly our philosophy here at Quintasia, is we want to show, for those that may be reticent is not the right word, but who may not have diversity and inclusion at the top of their list of priorities. But it's not just an altruistic thing to do. It's actually, you're going to find out that you're going to be more profitable if you do it, because you'll tell better stories. You'll have a better product because you're including a wider swath of humanity in the process. That's what we definitely believe.
And they're seeing that with Black Widow and and Wonder Woman also, which had female directors. That you can, even these bigger tentpole movies can have female directors, and they can still they're still gonna be best. They're still gonna be number one at the box office, blockbusters. So I think it's just it's unfortunate that it's taken, and kind of bizarre that it's taken so long. But look, we can't even get a female mayor in New York City. So there's still a lot of work to do.
We had a shot at it.
We had a good shot at it, but
didn't happen.
No.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you, of course, who listen to or view our podcast on a regular basis, you know how we roll. So it's our management team asking questions of our guests. So now I'm going to turn over the rest of the conversation to our CTO, Harv Lacko. Take it away, Harv.
Nice to meet you, Jamie.
Hi.
Glad to hear that you're getting the incremental increases as you go along, and I understand it is a qualitative analysis. Um, One of the things we're curious to know is the buzz around inclusion riders. Now, does NYWIFT support the inclusion riders? And if so, what do you think is going to be the long and short-term impact of including those?
I mean, NYWIFT hasn't put out like a formal statement on inclusion riders. It's not something, I mean, look, our whole mission is to support women who, in the film business and in television. So it's like, I would say our mission aligns with with the mission of inclusion riders.
Sure.
But I also think that it depends on and then I'm going to speak for myself, which is to say that I think that there are times when they're applicable and there are times when they're not. And that I'm not sure about a one size fits all. That, there are movies, for example, that are just, they're going to have an all white cast, and that's what it is because that's the story. And there are movies that are going to have an all African American cast because that's the story. So I think it depends on the project, and where you're shooting, and so I think I think they they probably serve a good purpose. They probably serve a good purpose on some projects, and probably on some projects they may not be applicable. I think one thing that, like New Jersey, for example, has an extra, I believe, 2% diversity tax credit. And I think things like that can also be helpful because it doesn't work for every project, but some projects that may push to think diversity, meaning ethnicity, female, gender, a lot of things go into that bucket. But I think that a diversity tax credit, you don't have to get it, but it might make some productions think and work a little bit harder towards maybe hiring more women, or or just more diversity in general. So I think tax credits are another way that people are kind of trying to tackle the issue. I don't know enough about the inclusivity riders to speak too much more on it, other than to say I'm sure it works really well sometimes, and I'm sure sometimes it might not be the best match.
Right.
And it depends on what the fine print is in terms of what the project is and how it marries together. But NYWIFT is always going to support more women and more diversity of crews and behind and in front of the camera. And we do we didn't do it last year, but when we were in person, we always do this event called we do like a below the line party where we honor someone who works below the line on a crew. And the last time we did it, I think, was maybe 2 years ago, and I actually pushed for the category, which was gaffer, and because I felt like it was really important to highlight a female gaffer working in the industry successfully, to show that was possible. So I think there's just a lot of different ways to highlight and push for more women, more inclusivity. Yeah. And the writers are one way, and I'm not to say that they work or don't work. I'm not fully sure, honestly.
So it sounds like you have a lot of different areas that you're involved in and a lot of different efforts, always with the approach of getting incremental increases. You recently had a summit with the Ford Foundation. I know you had a lot of different activities going on, but could you tell us a little bit about that summit with the Ford Foundation?
Sure. We've done 2 summits now. One was in person at the Ford Foundation, and this actually 3 summits. I think we've done 3. We've done 2 during the pandemic and 1 in person pre-pandemic. And this year it was 4 days, 2 hours a day. It's conversations and panels, and the summit really kind of thinks about the creative industry, reimagines it, thinks about how we can be forward thinking, and it's conversations that deal usually with something, a really important present cultural issue. The first year we did some stuff around the Me Too movement. This year we had a day that was very Asian American and Asian American filmmaker influenced. But we also have conversations with unions. Safe work, safety in the workplace is important to our members, especially as we're thinking about like how people are going back to work now, and it's sort of still in a pandemic, although it's evolving and changing. We did something with showrunners this year. We partnered with AMC and Warner Media, who are two of our big sponsors, who are fantastic supporters of NYWIFT. And the goal is really to keep these conversations moving forward, highlight and think about ways that we can just keeping these conversations moving and making sure that women have a voice on these topics. And the summits have been really important to NYWIFT. They gather hundreds of people together, women and men, and I should add that it also can be documentary focused or feature narrative focused, because we have both in our membership. And some of the issues are similar and some are not. And, like the unions are much stronger for features, but documentary filmmakers, a lot of documentarians still feel really unsupported and kind of out there, and that, they're not in the union, so they're not getting health benefits, and they're not, so they're still sort of fighting an uphill battle with that. Also, I don't want to leave out the Native American community and the Latina community, who have also been a big part of the conversation and are a really important part of the conversation for NYWIFT. We try to be as inclusive as we can. It's not perfect, but we try.
Nothing is, but the approach in building the community, you're involved in a lot of different areas. We're happy to have you as part of the Quintasia family here in our community. So we definitely welcome you, and I think it's good to build the community. Now, I understand that you're working on a podcast of your own. Now, we've been sort of focused on podcasts recently, and you're sort of on the film and television, and that's where we're looking to go to. So it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about the podcast that you're doing.
I want to go back one sec just to NYWIFT and say that NYWIFT would not be possible without Terry Lawler, who was the executive director before Cynthia Lopez, who we have now. Terry was the ED for maybe over 20 years. And now we have the fabulous Cynthia Lopez, who used to run POV for PBS. And we have an amazing staff. And I just want to give them a shout out. It's not been easy to pivot during a global pandemic. And then so many things have happened in the world during this pandemic that we, as NYWIFT, felt like we needed to address. And it's just, the staff has...
Sounds like they're a little overwhelmed with the volume of tasks before you.
It's a lot, it's a lot. I hope that they get some downtime in August, but it's not easy to be a nonprofit during, right now. And they've really kept they haven't just kept it going. I think they've enhanced it, and it's grown in ways that maybe it wouldn't have grown before. And so just a public thank you to the full team and to those who came before them. Moving on, podcast. Yeah, I've been thinking about a project for a long time and kind of how to get it off the ground, which is never easy. And a couple years ago, I produced IFP Week, which is, if people don't know about it, they should look it up. It's a sort of it's the independent feature project, or now it's called the Gotham. The organization is called the Gotham, and they do, a week of programming in September where they take projects, and it's meet and greets with investors, and it's also panels and sort of informational stuff and career building. And I produced the event for the organization, and we did a lot around shorts and podcasting, among other things, doc features and stuff like that. But it just re-emphasized to me the ways in which the industry is evolving and changing and embracing in I think a bigger way alternative formats to the more traditional feature and just mostly features and documentary. But I think it's becoming, it's opening up, and the shorts now, you can make a short just to make a short, and it can get distribution and it can do something. It used to be, I think you'd do a short because you wanted to make a feature, and that's why you needed to do a short, which is still the case. But I think that now shorts do stand on their own more. And then you have podcasting, which is a feeder to longer form projects, and also I think just a beautiful way to tell a story on its own, which it doesn't even necessarily need to go to the next step, but the next type of format, but sometimes it does. So I was listening to another podcast that had a kind of similar, it was a different story completely, but it was about a time and a place, and it had a true crime element, and it kind of struck me that I had this story that I've been trying to tell, that it could kind of fit into that world. And so I'm doing it actually with my mom. It's a mother-daughter reflection on my on being raised as a back to the land hippie in West Virginia in the 1970s and 80s, but with a true crime component to it. And I kind of listened to that other podcast and said oh, I think we could do that. Now, I should say that when I first thought that, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, or that I had to teach myself how to do audio and what it meant to do a podcast and then sell it.
We can relate to that, Equitasia.
Yes, which I never do my own sound or anything like that, but we're working with a wonderful company called Wonder Media Network. They're all women-owned podcast company that really focuses on women and politics, and I'd say, even I'll speak for them and say change makers, female change makers. And so this project kind of fit into that, because also, back to the landers in the 70s and 80s were also very political. And so then the pandemic hit, and podcasting is actually something that you can do during a pandemic. You don't have to be in person. And it's been really fabulous and hard and daunting. And, I think there's something really interesting about telling a story without visuals, especially I think the 70s, and because I feel like whenever you see, not whenever, but oftentimes when you see something about the 70s in film or television, it's pretty cliche. It's told through a fairly cliche lens.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I may not look it, but I actually lived as, a teenager in the 70s and then, moved on. But I'm curious as to this podcast that you're doing. I'm sure that you've discovered things about your mom as a result of doing this podcast. If you could just touch on, I see you very critical. I see you very incremental in your approach of improving. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe the things that happened with your mom while you were doing the podcast that sort of struck you as, oh, this is something incremental I got out of it that I wasn't expecting, if appropriate?
Well, we're really part of the podcast is looking at a friend of my parents who disappeared in the 1980s. And so I'd say more than I come from a pretty open family. Where, I have a dad, but I also have two moms. My mom is gay, and four sisters, or three sisters. There's four of us, so we're pretty tight and open. But more than that, I would say, is kind of learning about the layers of this family friend that we've been exploring, and kind of telling her story and our own story and the parallels between them and the way that they intersected. And it's been really fun and just kind of surprising. And I don't want to give too much away.
I was going to say, I don't want you to give away the ending.
There's a lot. My parents lived, the Back to the Land movement, and West Virginia in the 70s and 80s was I would say they would describe it as a pretty magical experience. It was about community. It was about music. It was about marijuana. It was about psychedelics. It was about raising kids with not very much structure. It was about taking risks. It was about politics. It was about trying to think about ways to make the world a better place. But it was also about, but they were also very young. It's not. I would not say that the Back to the Land community in general was. They were young. Many of them were in their 20s. They were having, and people had kids younger back then.
Yes.
So, my parents moved back to the land. They were 24 and 28, and I was 10 days old. So it's just I think it's actually really timely and interesting right now to look back and look at a group of people who were kind of thinking about a different way to live and a different way to be in the world. And that, like, I don't know, I just feel like my generation is often just so careful about everything that we do. And, we need to live in a certain area, and our kids need to go to a certain school, and we need to, I don't know, it's less risk. There's
more structure and less risk.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to understand and look at that time, and think about how we live today and what can we take away from it. There were a lot of similarities. There was a corrupt president. They had an impeachment. They were dealing with issues of sustainability. They were dealing with wars that they didn't want to be in. And so in some ways, there's a lot that's similar, but yet we live in the world very differently, and we raise our kids very differently, partially because of the milk cartons and all of that stuff.
Well, that still went on. It just wasn't published. And I think the big difference from my perspective is, there were people that were living off the land in the 70s. And, there were people I knew that had no home. They would just, crash at this person's, and they were welcomed with open arms, with food and clothing and everything else. And they weren't viewed as homeless. They were just viewed as free spirits. And I think that, it was a different time, and it's certainly, you're right, there's a lot of analogies to be drawn today, but I think it's a more of those people are out there now without homes, without food, without clothing, and it's not as easy to get the support. It was always the sort of exception or the free spirits, and they were embraced by the community and supported, whereas now they're viewed as a problem.
Right. And then when I grew up, I mean, we had people who were viewed as they weren't viewed as a problem. They were just viewed as like maybe
free spirits.
Weird, or not free spirits. I mean, there were definitely people who were a little crazier than other people, but they were just viewed as like the crazy person. Like it was not like, but they were still like not kicked out or anything, as long as they weren't hurting anybody.
Right.
And and West Virginia also is just a pretty magical place. It's a big mix of all different kinds of people, and so it's been fun to look back at kind of what was happening then and what it's like now, and some of the messes that they got into, and it was there was some pretty wild stuff going on. But I've been trying to figure out how to tell this kind of overall story for a while now, this back to the land part of it, which is the part I'm most interested in, because there was something to it. I'm not, would I do it myself now? I don't know, but I think there's some takeaways from it, and I'm kind of trying to figure out what those takeaways are and help give that information out to a broader audience. So it's been fun. I think it'll come out in the fall sometime. It'll be 10 episodes. It's a 10 episode serialized show, and it's called I Was Never There.
And how would people find it?
It'll be out. It'll be out on all the podcast, anywhere you get podcasts, it'll be out. And Wonder Media Network has a website, and they have a lot of other podcasts that they do. And it'll be called I Was Never There.
Well, please remember to send us the information when it does come out. We'd like to share it with our audience as well, and have them check it out. No, thank you. Yeah, it's been interesting going from film and television to podcasting. It's similar because it's still content, and it's still storytelling, but it's different. Like the staffing is different, and the process is a little different, and so it's been fun to learn something new in the second half of my 40s, and to enhance. And I actually really like it. I'd like to do another one. I'm not sure what yet, but I'd like to try to do another one after this. But this one, because it's my personal story, it's been so it's been full on. And every time you think you're done with the interviews, especially in true crime, something else comes up. Right. A new angle, a new twist. It's certainly because podcasts can have take on so many different forms. For us, we've kind of settled into this interview formats, but there's so many different like the kind of content you're talking about is completely different from what we're doing, and then there's others that there's just so many different ways people have been creative with what you can do with the podcast. And, we're kind of a hybrid. It used to be all audio. We do both audio and video. Depends on what platform you happen to see the podcast on. But
I've
all
also
these
never done true crime, so have become this like junior detective, which is not something I ever thought I would do. And you can get really sucked into it and have to be really careful with it too, because it's a human that you're talking about, and you have to be really conscious of that and careful and thoughtful. And that part, the true crime part, has probably been the biggest jump for me in something that's just not something I've done before, and maybe one of the harder parts of that type of storytelling.
Not to give away the ending, but did doing the podcast sort of facilitate or help you to uncover additional details that, had you not done the podcast, you wouldn't have discovered?
Yes.
Okay. I had a sneaky suspicion it did, but
Yeah.
hopefully that'll be a hook for our podcast listeners to come and search out your podcast when it premieres.
Yes, there was definitely stuff we did not know.
Or even different people knew different pieces, and until you assembled them together, it wasn't clear how those pieces fit together.
Correct. People live very it's a complicated story. People are smarter than you think and wilder than you think.
But I definitely want to thank you, Jamie, for coming down, and well, not coming down, you but speaking with us today, joining us on the podcast. And it's amazing how our worlds kind of intersect, because we have interacted with other people that I believe that NYWIFT interacts with, like the Asian American Film Club. We're doing work with them, and want two honorees of NYWIFT. We happen to have worked with their film. Delana Waldron, who made a short film called Era, and Christine, I always get her last name. I want to say Nixon, but I believe it's Dixon, who also won an award from NYWIFT for being a Best Actress award. So, it's amazing how these connections you see. That I was unaware until I happened to see that. And also, I'm also Quintasia is also a member of the New York Production Alliance as well.
Yes.
So,
and Flo, who's on our board, is
yes.
the head of NYPA, and she's an old friend, and she's fantastic. And one thing I would say about the festivals is, during the pandemic, we really had to think about ways to stay involved with festivals, because they were all virtual. And so we've started to do small awards at festivals, Hamptons, Woodstock, different festivals, to supporting women filmmakers through that, like through festivals, so that we can stay connected to the festivals and to during this time, when they're all virtual.
Right. Well, it's definitely been a great conversation, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching and or listening to the Quintasia podcast. I am Gregory Jenkins on behalf of Harv Lacko and our guest, Jamie Zelermyer. I'm going to sign off and say bye-bye for now, and we'll see you next time.